This chart shows a picture of an ancient symbol called the Bhavachakra in Buddhism. Sometimes we call it the Wheel of Life. Well, Bhava means becoming, or birth, or existence. And chakra means wheel, or vortex. And so the Bhavachakra is kind of like that planes of existence chart that we were just looking at. The planes of existence chart was just a more linear and scientific way of showing this symbol here. So this wheel beholds all sentient beings in the universe. They exist in the wheel because of karma. Everything in nature runs in cycles. When we develop as individuals, for example, we go through these basic stages in life. First, we're born, then we grow and mature into an adult, then we sustain adulthood for a while, and then finally, we grow old and die. But on a larger scale, humanity as a whole also has its cycles. Civilizations are born. They develop, they prosper for some time, and eventually they fall. Animals in nature move in waves. So for example, the previous wave of humanity that we recently came out of was called the Piscean Age, or era. And it had characteristics of the zodiac sign Pisces. It was conservative. It was secretive. So ever since the 60s, though, we've been living in the Aquarian Age. It's a new age. If we look around at our universe, what else do we have that runs in cycles? We have the inhabitants of a planet on the bottom left of this chart. Creatures, animals, living things, all of which are born, grow, sustain, and die. A planet is a being too. Planets don't last forever. They have a lifespan. It may have started off as a crater, but after a few billion years, the first accumulation of water and atmosphere developed, and then life flourished. So it grows, matures, sustains, and dies. Stars don't last forever. The death of a star takes billions of years. A solar system has a lifespan as well. The orbits of planets in a solar system eventually weaken and separate, and after an inconceivable amount of time, they lose their orbit. So the subconscious mind, our ego in other words, is no different. The egoic mind, which is also known as the animal soul, Nefesh in Hebrew, in Kabbalah, is part of cyclic existence. And it has a very long lifespan because it exists with us over the course of millions of incarnations, or lifetimes through the various kingdoms of nature. So at the dawn of our evolution, our soul, or essence, began its evolution in the mineral kingdom. And after some time, it started to accumulate conditions, or egos, that would help it survive through the plant and animal kingdoms. And at this point, we sometimes say that the soul is in a state of involution rather than evolution. So the soul that was once in its pure state as a mineral elemental is now creating the ego. And as I explained in the previous lecture, the ego carries energy, and all energy carries karma, or consequences, causes. And in terms of how it functions, it only knows how to do one thing. It only repeats itself the more you feed it. So if you've ever seen that occult symbol of the circular-shaped snake eating its tail, that represents the eventual self-destruction that comes from feeding desire. So truthfully, all of our egos are addictions, because all they do is strengthen desire and repeat. We only start calling certain activities addictions when they take over our lives. So common things like substance abuse, video game addiction, porn addiction, addiction to TV and movies. But we also have many more subtle addictions that we think are normal and don't call addictions. Every time someone criticizes us, we have this urge to protect our self-image by countering them with some clever, sarcastic remark, or with witty humor. Or when we have this impulse to compensate when we've failed in some way, always trying to fix our image so that people see us in the right light, the way we want them to see us. So nirvana on the top right part of this chart, it's sometimes translated as heaven, but it literally means cessation, to stop existing. This is the state of non-being. As one master put it, samsara is to spin from one place to another. Nirvana is to cut through the cycle. So more specifically, the cessation of karma, the law of cause and effect, action and consequence. Everything that exists is energy, and all forms of energy carry karma, which is the energy exchange. Everything that exists in the wheel of becoming, or the wheel of life, exists there because it carries karma. So in order for something to stop existing and abide in nirvana, the karma or energy must be paid first. Nirvana is the cessation of that constant back and forth cycling between action and consequence, action and consequence. And in the middle of this great wheel is the axle of mechanical nature that perpetuates it. The qualities of mechanical nature is summarized as being ignorance, craving, and aversion. And so it's symbolized by three animals: a peacock, a snake, and a pig. The peacock is considered a very proud animal, and it also symbolizes craving and passion. The snake represents fear and avoidance, and the pig symbolizes ignorance, because they eat whatever they find on the ground. So most of us here, because of influence from society and cultural conditioning, and our tendency to copy the behaviors of others, we think it's normal that everyone is here to pursue pleasure, and we run away from pain. And everyone is living for themselves, to get as much as they can out of life. We think it's normal to live in a self-serving and greedy way, because we don't have any other reference. And that's because our humanity has its consciousness in a somnambulistic state, which is very strange and unusual compared to the life forms on other planets and solar systems. In other words, our consciousness is deeply asleep. So we can't see what life is like beyond our planet, beyond desire. So we don't compare our humanity with any other humanity. We don't look at other planets and extraterrestrials and think to ourselves, by God, we've been doing this wrong this whole time. And look at those beings over there in that other galaxy. They don't have really cluttered, dirty, big cities. They seem to have this boundless supply of energy and resources. They're efficient. They're not wasting energy and wasting time on petty things. They're not constantly serving themselves, going from one pleasure to another. No, we don't have that kind of comparison, so we think that the way we live is normal and okay. But it's totally abnormal, as Samael has explained to us. So why else do we suffer so much? Because our mind is heavily conditioned by desire. Here is a comparison of beings with varying degrees of consciousness. We have on the bottom left, the terrestrial man. So the reality is, most humans have about 97% of our consciousness trapped in the ego, the subconscious mind. And that's why everything we do and think is rooted in our sense of self and rooted in desire. We wake up in the morning, we want to eat something, we want to talk to this person, we want coffee, we want to make ourselves look good. And then we continue on with our day, and while we're driving to work, we're fantasizing the whole time. We're fantasizing with our pride, we're listening to music, and fantasizing that we're in some music video, and we're not paying attention to the road a third of the time. And then we get to work, and while we're working, we're thinking about that coffee break already. We're craving lunch. And our daily lives just continue on like this. What do I want right now? What do you want? What do I want later tonight? What do I want to do? Who do I want to talk to? As Samael once explained, we are creatures that have our psyche in an abnormal state. We have an imbalance between subconscious mind and conscious mind. So that little sliver of consciousness would be those moments when we're paying attention to the road, when we're driving. Our attention is on the present, and we're not thinking about the past, we're not imagining the future, we're just here and now, paying attention, relaxed, maybe even serene, just observing and being very self-aware. Let's turn to the extraterrestrials on other planets and galaxies. So these entities on different planets generally have a lot less ego than we do. So they live in a completely different economy, because imagine, if we had half the ego that we do now, how would we live? If we had half the pride we do now, half the anger, half the laziness, half the desire, we wouldn't be spending so much time and energy on desire, on ourselves. We wouldn't have huge, cluttered cities where we're trying to squeeze in as many people as we can to do as many wild and complicated things as we can imagine. If you investigate extraterrestrial life and civilizations and meditation, you can find out for yourself what life is like. They don't have big cities. Our big cities are overpopulated, complicated, and very dirty. We need to lock up our houses all the time. We need insurance on everything, car insurance, insurance on our possessions, life insurance, because we don't trust our neighbors. Continuing on to the top left being, with their pie chart being on the right side, these are angels, or Buddhas, or masters. These are broad but synonymous terms. Some of them are here on this planet, working in a physical body, but their mind doesn't belong here. They're not an animal anymore. They don't have lust. They don't have anger. They're not aggressive. These beings are always relaxed, serene, and happy. So when these beings die physically, their consciousness goes back to where it belongs. Their consciousness is not trapped by the ego, so it vibrates at the level of heaven. And so that's where they go once their physical body expires. If we have an interest in ascending into this golden age that a lot of misled spiritual people think will just happen automatically, we have to put in the diligence and conscious effort to become like this being on the top left here. We go back to the Bhavachakra symbol here. Buddhism sometimes categorizes beings into types: demons, hungry ghosts, animals, demigods, and gods. So if we look at our humanity by itself on Earth, we can see all these psychological aspects that both the higher and lower subtle worlds contain. At the very bottom, we have demons, who are ruled by a severe karmic debt and mechanical nature. What kind of people are demons on this planet? These are people who only want for themselves. They're barbaric. They have no compassion for other beings. They don't have a heart, and truthfully, a real demon doesn't even have a conscience. They don't have free consciousness in their mind. Their mind is just a collection of aggregates, subconscious and infraconsciousness. In the Jewish mystical tradition of Kabbalah, these beings are called klipot. It means empty shell. These people are only here to just fulfill the karma of this world. Animals are ruled by aggression and mechanical behavior. They're enslaved by humans. They have a limited ability to think for themselves. If they are suffering like us, they can't commit suicide. Most of them are not intelligent enough to do that. They're unable to remedy illness, of course. They're stuck in the wilderness. There are no doctors around to help them when they eat poison, when they get an infection. Their behavior is very mechanical. They don't have the intellect to practice Dharma. So their evolution is very slow and painful, because they can't evolve themselves consciously. Nature just does it for them, automatically. Who are the hungry ghosts on this planet? Hungry ghosts are beings who are in constant pursuit of basic necessities. The hungry ghosts are ruled by severe hunger, thirst, illness, slavery, and fear. These are slaves and people in poverty on Earth. So they don't have the luxury to practice Dharma because they're barely able to support themselves in most cases. So how can they afford to serve others and earn spiritual experiences? So they're just getting by in order to survive. They're just paying their karma for the most part. And just a little bit above this level exists the demigods. The demigods live a reasonably comfortable life. They can afford to live and maintain good health. They might be able to afford an education, so they can pursue higher occupations. And they have some free time on their hands to enjoy hobbies and a social life. In this population, if you consider the lower middle class and the middle class to be this demographic, then this population makes up only 32% of the global population. And so these people are more or less beyond physical suffering. But beyond physical suffering, we're just faced with a new set of challenges, aren't we? Us demigods are overwhelmed by our complicated lives and relationships. At this level, most of our problems are psychological. Now we have emotional problems like chronic anger, depression, jealousy, anxiety, loneliness. Statistics show that about 30% of the global population is lonely. And have you noticed the anxiety and depression epidemic here in the West? I was really surprised to notice just how many people I personally know who are prescribed to anxiety medications to remedy panic attacks. Almost a third of the people I know are prone to panic attacks. And it's horrible when they get them, because they can't function at all. Their intellect shuts down, their body goes into a fight or flight response. So the demigods are a very sensitive, anxious, and perfectionist demographic. We're sensitive because we're so attached to our sense of security, and most of us don't have this mentality where we need to train ourselves to be resilient all the time, to be physically resilient all the time like the hungry ghosts, because the hungry ghosts are like survivors. So they're used to the cold weather, and in India, poor people are used to sleeping on mounds of gravel on the street as cars are racing by. Here in the West, we are constantly striving to look good. We perform surgeries on ourselves and spend thousands of dollars on our body image. But we're always dissatisfied with what we see in the mirror, and always envious of others. And some of us have looks, and we're intelligent, but we're still not getting the respect that we thought we would get from others. We want to be perfect, but we're humiliated. We want a good reputation, but our friends and family are criticizing us all the time, and doubting our abilities and misjudging us. The humans as demigods, these envious, jealous gods, who are always trying to reach the level of the gods, are always confused and complicating things, always fighting with each other. These are the everyday middle and upper class people, as I mentioned, which make up between 32 and 35% of the population on Earth. So not very much in terms of the rest of the population. The demigods are constantly striving to collect more and more things, to make as much money as we can, to accumulate as much status as we can, to have as much sex as we can before we die. It's taught that the demigods are ruled by passion, so that includes desire, lust, anger. A lot of us are good at hiding it, but we have a lot of pride. And with all that pride comes a great deal of shame and self-pity. You're starting to see how with every level of suffering that a person conquers, more challenges await. It just comes in a different form. All the dimensions that we're familiar with have pain. But at the same time, it's also a good thing. We need that, because the physical plane is very unique, that it has this unique blend of both suffering and pleasure. And you need to understand what suffering is to have any interest in liberating yourself from that suffering. Because the gods, for example, don't have that concept. So let's look at the gods of this planet. What does a god have? good looks, great power, tremendous respect, good health. The gods as humans on Earth have all the fame and money in the world. We can say that the gods are famous people, celebrities, and politicians. They have everything that this world has to offer. They don't feel any urge to liberate themselves from suffering because they're not suffering enough, and their attachments are too strong. The population of gods or celebrities on Earth doesn't even make up 1%. Now, in North America, celebrities make up about 1% of the population. And just like the gods in Nirvana, the gods here are ruled by attachment. What we have right now, this human existence, is temporary and very precious. The human kingdom itself also has its limit. So those who believe in reincarnation need to realize that since everything has a cycle, the amount of opportunities that a soul gets to reincarnate as a human is limited. It's limited to the cycle length of the human kingdom. In esoteric traditions, it's taught that souls that reach the human level are given 108 human lives. This number tends to be accurate, but it also has a symbolic meaning that represents completion, perfection, enlightenment, and other similar things. In numerology, when you have a group of numbers, to get the symbolic meaning of those numbers, you have to add them all together to create a single digit sum. So 108 is really 1 plus 8 to equal 9. There are many spiritual people out there who don't fully understand just how evolution and involution really works. So they've heard about the law of attraction and they've heard about the law of impermanence, and they understand that nature runs in cycles, but they apply it in the wrong way. So they think that everything on the evolving side of nature, such as plants and certain animals and people, will simply continue to evolve until they attain their inevitable enlightenment. And that's where they're misled. They think enlightenment will just happen without having to do anything. The idea that our humanity right now is going through this inevitable golden age ascension plan, this love revolution, and after many ages of evolution, all of us will have ascended into the superior worlds, into heaven, into nirvana. This idea has one major shortcoming. It doesn't take into consideration how creatures in nature de-evolve. The truth is, evolution is separated into two types: mechanical evolution and conscious evolution. Everything below the level of Buddhahood belongs to animal nature, which is part of mechanical evolution. This includes humans, because humans are just animals with intellects. All the plants and animals that are evolving are doing so mechanically, automatically, habitually. So as I explained, this is because most animals can't think for themselves, so nature has to do the work of evolution for them. Now, everything above the animal level is Buddha nature, which belongs to conscious evolution. So it's only at the human level where we begin to have a significant ability to think for ourselves and make conscious decisions. And those more deliberate choices that we make on a day-to-day basis place us on a path that can lead in two opposing directions. On one path, we can choose to keep feeding all of our animalistic habits and desires, which will in turn make us more animalistic. We don't even have to make a deliberate choice to act as an animal, because we already feed most of our desires automatically, without thinking about it, without self-awareness. And on the other path, we can choose to act more consciously and mindfully, like an angel or a Buddha. And this here is the key to continuing evolution as a real human being. The human kingdom, you see, is the apex, the pinnacle of mechanical evolution. It's not logical to think that a human can keep evolving into conscious kingdoms of evolution if they don't behave and think in a conscious way. They're not paying attention to what they're doing on a moment-to-moment basis. When you look at life as a whole this way, you can see that there's an enormous amount of polarity and an inconceivable diversity in sentient experience. From this point of view, you can see that life is just a series of challenges, lifetime after lifetime. And only a small portion of it, our 108 existences as a human, provide us some balance between suffering and pleasure. An instructor that I follow once said in a lecture that if we became fully aware of the entirety of life, we could see that it would dawn upon us that this life right now is not worth living the way we normally do. Your current life may have been full of struggles. At least in this day and age, we have much better healthcare and technology. So we have a very clear sense of comfort, and we have a sense of suffering. But imagine the lives that you had in the 1700s, in the 1600s, in the Renaissance, in the 1400s, the Middle Ages, before we knew what bacteria was. Or what about the times of Egypt before Christ, like 1500 BCE? Do you think most of those lives were easy? So when you look at life in its entirety this way, is it really worth it? To let your ego, which has causes, keep repeating the same dramas and tragedies of the past, and allowing yourself to make the same mistakes, life after life after life. And then finally, once the human incarnations have been exhausted, to go back down to where you came from, to re-enter into an animal body once again, and to relive all those animal lives in a devolving state. And that's not to mention what life will be like in the plant and mineral kingdoms when a soul is in a devolving state. So this is why in Tibetan Buddhism, people dedicate their entire lives to their next one, because the reward is eternal happiness, the cessation of suffering. Enlightenment is really the only kind of happiness that lasts. Since it doesn't involve action, it doesn't involve karma. So once you've paid all your karma and you've done the work on yourself, you cease to exist in all ways. This human life right now is just another dream out of millions of different lives that we've already had. This life is a bardo, just a transition from one place to another. You've been down this road before. So to summarize and conclude, I'm going to read a quote by Samuel Aoun-Waor. He says, "Pain exists in childhood, adolescence, youth, maturity, elderliness, because everything in this world has pain. Pain disappears when we cease to exist in all the levels of the mind. Only by dissolving the psychological I do we radically cease to exist. Let us work and rest happily, abandoning ourselves to the course of life. Let us exhaust the turbid and rotten waters of habitual thinking. Thus, into the emptiness, gnosis will flow, and with it, the happiness of living."